I would love to jump in and find out more about your journey. How did you become a healing journey navigator, Reiki Master, and sound therapy practitioner?
Basically, I got into all of this many years ago. I would say probably like in the 1990s. I was really drawn to energy medicine. I did a lot of got a lot of acupuncture at that point, and I started going to drumming circles and sound baths and things of that nature, and found that it not only helped me from the standpoint of like just relaxing. And I had a very high stress job at the time, helped me to relax. It helped me to balance. If I was feeling completely ungrounded, uncentered, it just felt really good. And then fast forward, and I've always been a musician. Like since I was a little girl, I played piano and classical flute. And so I've always been really drawn to music. And fast forward to a couple of decades ago, I started having like a lot of autoimmune issues. I have seven spinal diseases. They really began to um, cause a lot of problems, and I just began digging down into this deeper. I was going for a lot more treatments, and then at some point I realized that if I was able to study, I was able to help myself, and that's kind of how the journey began. And then during COVID, I realized that a lot of people were doing global sound baths, as well as locally and regionally, that I started doing virtually, and I felt a difference when I took their sound baths. And so that's when I began really doing more by way of sound baths that are of a more virtual nature. And going to a sound bath, like at a yoga center or a meditation center, they are fantastic. They're great for relaxation, balancing the chakras, removing obstacles like in the energy channel and all of that. But when we are able to really do like a one-on-one, and that's the thing that I really do for people. I don't do group sound baths, I do one-on-one. You're able to target what a person is experiencing, what their personal issues are, whether they might be having sleepless nights, they might be really burned out from work, they might be very sick with any number of mental or physical or even spiritual issues that they want to work on. And so by working with someone one-on-one, you're able to really target the sound bath in the selection of, which chakra bowls do I use? Each bowl is aligned with a chakra. Are we grounding people? Do they need more heart energy? So you can really target in with that. And then other instruments like I help a lot of people, it turns out, with things like writer's block, creative block. And that really is about people would think, oh, you have to clear the upper channels and like the third eye and the throat chakras. And sometimes that's true. But a lot of times it's when people aren't grounded. And sound baths are really terrific for that. And in the work that I do with sound baths, I also combine the Reiki energy. So through the entire sound bath, the Reiki energy is flowing as well. The healing navigation part of it, I came to my own story is, and a little bit of this, in 2016, at the end of like quite a lot of spinal problems over the years, I had three ruptured discs in my lower back. In December of 2016, the fourth one ruptured. It was disastrous. It left me bedridden for 5 years and over 5 years. And I couldn't play my classical flute. I couldn't play guitar or piano or any of the things I was doing, but I could do some sound healing. I began keeping a journal, which was how I kept. That was what kept my mind together, frankly, because you can imagine being flat on your back for so long. It's hard to hold on to hope. I mean, especially when you're in an extraordinary amount of pain, and the disc was inoperable. And so I just had to wait it out, basically. And so I started keeping a journal. I've always kept journals, and it turned out to be my lifeline. I wrote about what I was going through. And then after a couple years of this journal, I looked at it one day and I went, there's a lot of wisdom here that I'm like telling friends when they're going through something. I think there's a book here. And that's when I wrote my book, Suffering to Thriving, Your Toolkit for Navigating Your Healing Journey. And then I began going more into the practice of combining the sound and the Reiki with healing journey navigation. And it's not medical advice. It's helping people to figure out, intuitively what works for them from the standpoint of complementary medicine. In other words, first of all, how can we maximize what they're doing with their doctors and their other medical professionals? And then there's a layer of complementary medicine, and doctors are increasingly finding that these things work, especially doctors in functional medicine and naturopathy and those sorts of things. So that's sort of how all of that came together for me.
Wow, that's a beautiful story. I have so many follow up questions. I think the first thing, just to level set for the listeners, how would you define Reiki and sound bathing?
Yeah, okay, those are great questions. I love those questions. Reiki is actually tapping in to the universal life force. That's what it is. That is the short definition of it. And there are as many ways to practice Reiki out there as there are Reiki practitioners. It comes from a long line of teachers. And but what I'm finding increasingly is there are a number of more current day Reiki practitioners that are melding it into these other practices as well. Uh, I find it to just be a phenomenal way to ease anxiety, stress, burnout, all of those things, to give energy. But unlike, I think a lot of people have the misconception about Reiki that the Reiki practitioner is giving energy to a person, and it's actually not that. It's like you become an open channel, and the energy flows through you, through your hands, or in the case of distance Reiki, and it flows through you. And then the sound bath. Okay, so the way I like to describe it is it's kind of like this immersion in sound frequencies, right? So it can be anything from like I said, going to a yoga studio or a meditation center and listening to crystal bowls. Increasingly, sound practitioners are building in lots of instruments. For example, in my practice, I use Native American flutes, which I've been playing for many decades, and then realized I can make this part of my practice. Frame drum, chimes, Tibetan bowls, crystal bowls. I have a gong, and a lot of people are hesitant about the gong, but it actually is one of the most healing instruments. And many times they'll say, I wasn't sure I was going to like that gong, but they felt the energy of it. And so the reason why it works is like we are energy beings. Everything in the universe is energy. Einstein and Nikola Tesla had great quotes about, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy. And that's what both sound and Reiki are, right? And so, when you think about the why of it for sound, our bodies are, it varies, but anywhere between like 65 to 75% water. And water is a superb conductor for sound. And so those sound waves actually permeate our bodies. It doesn't even matter so much what you hear as what vibrations your body picks up on. And I love this. There's a researcher at UCLA here in California, and his name is James Jimzewski. James Jimzewski. He has discovered, working in his lab and monitoring the cells of our body, that every cell in the body creates a sound of its own. It has its own unique sound, this vibration, right? And when cells become atrophied or sick, diseased, and are otherwise not working, the very thing that they produce, sound, is what revives them. And so that's sort of the principle behind the sonic science. And there are lots of great researchers out there who are actually partnering with medical doctors and in medical research labs to do this kind of research, to monitor what is actually happening in the body when sound is happening, and what frequencies work. And one of the reasons the gong is one of the most healing of the instruments is because it has the highest highs and the lowest lows that we can't even hear, but our cells pick up on that vibration and begin to resonate with them. And so that's kind of the geeky science part, which I happen to love, about why sound and Reiki actually works so well for us.
Yeah, I love the geeky part because it allows me to understand a lot more the value of these practices. Because, like I said at the beginning, I see people practice sound bathing and I never understood the value of it. I mean, obviously, I didn't dismiss it, but I didn't understand what the sound was doing to the body or why that would be significant in healing, and how you just broke that down with the study about each of our cells having their own sound and being able to be revived or rejuvenated by sound makes a lot of sense, and it alludes to how powerful um, sound healing as a practice is, coupled with Reiki, which is a lot of energy healing as well, which all really cool stuff. Now I want to touch on what you said about struggling with a lot of autoimmune diseases and being able to find healing. Can you go a little bit more in depth with that? I know that you stumbled upon Reiki and sound healing, and that helped along with the healing journey. But could you just expand on what it was like to be dealing with those issues and then having this holistic practice coupled with, medical advice to help you really push you forward in your healing process?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love talking about this because so many people are struggling with autoimmune. I mean, I find this in the work that I do among my circle of family and friends. And, doctors are finding that they're actually increasing and they're identifying what used to be probably a small handful of autoimmune diseases that are now finding that even some of the diseases that people are having that we didn't think were autoimmune diseases are. The last estimate I heard from a doctor was there are like 150 autoimmune diseases now. That's phenomenal. It's an enormous number of people suffer from them. So my personal story goes back to I was living in Washington, D.C. I was beginning to see just a new regular GP. I shook her hand and she turned my hand over and she said, "You have Raynaud's disease." And I'm like, I wasn't having any problems. So I said, "What does that mean?" And she says, "Well, it's a disease that your capillaries close off and your hands become cold." I says, "Yeah, my hands are always cold." I says, "What do we do about it?" She says, "Nothing unless it becomes worse." Fast forward 20 years, my husband and I moved to a mile in the sky where we live now in the Southern California mountains. Cold winters, high altitude triggers for this disease. And I started having tremendous issues with my hands and my feet, not just getting cold, turning white, red, blue, purple, it became very, very serious. I nearly lost some toes to this because what happens is if you can't nip it in the bud, gangrene can happen. Like, who knew? And so I wasn't getting answers from my doctor, my regular doctor. And so I'd seen him and his partner 6 times over the course of a couple of months. It was getting worse and worse and worse. And I knew I had to do something. So I ended up just seeing a dermatologist in a neighboring town. He walks in, he looks at my hand, he says, "Oh, you have Raynaud's disease." I said, "Yeah, I've heard that before. I came here to talk about my feet." And he says, "No, that's what that is." And I had no idea at that time that it can cause so many very, very serious issues. He immediately plugged me in with a rheumatologist, which is typically who you go to if you're having autoimmune. And I was on just massive, massive, massive doses of a number of medications. And up until that point, I wasn't taking medications. So it was a big like gulp for me. I knew I had to do this. But then I began to just seek answers and do quite a lot of research. And in my book, I call this being super sleuthy, because we have to be our own, not only our own best advocates when it comes to our health, we have to look into what really works for us. Every human body is different. So what works for me might not work for you, and vice versa. And so I just began trying to follow my intuition and figure out like what are the things. And a number of doctors of naturopathy and functional medicine and complementary medicine and regenerative medicine, there are a whole branch of doctors out there who are really into looking at the body holistically. And after a lot of doctors who were just looking at my hands and feet and saying, we just have to keep putting more meds, and I was at the maximum dosages, that's where it began to get very scary. And what led me to say, sound and Reiki alone aren't going to heal this on my part. I have to find other answers. And so I began to look at basically all the usual suspects. I ate a very healthy, clean, vegetarian, mostly diet, vegetarian and fish. I thought I was doing all the right things. I had a wheat allergy I knew about for quite a long time and wasn't eating that. But there were other things that were huge triggers for autoimmune. As Dr. Gundry, who wrote The Plant Paradox and some other great books, talks about it, people with autoimmune are the canaries in the coal mine, right? And so things like lectins, which at the time I did not know what those were, but as it turns out, animals in the natural world will avoid plants and vegetables and fruits that are lectins. And basically it's for the layman, I can't describe the science of it, of course, but it is, there's a rather poisonous secretion that plants make, sometimes around their seeds, sometimes in other parts of the plant, that animals pick up are poisonous. These kinds of plants are tomatoes, eggplants, zucchinis and squashes, everything that I was eating in my diet, right? Quinoa, one of my favorite things, turns out to be a lectin. And so I very begrudgingly said, I've got to experiment with this. So I did an elimination diet. And I began to phase those out. And sure enough, like down a notch or two on the nerve pain from the Raynaud's and not having as many flare-ups. So managing flare-ups becomes the big thing. Stress is a huge trigger. And that is where the sound and the Reiki energy really made a difference for me. Then there are just things like supplements. Today, many doctors have a protocol of supplements for autoimmune, anything from higher dosages than the normal person needs of vitamin D and the B complex vitamins and omegas and all of those things. So any of your listeners who are dealing with autoimmune, I would say, start researching those things, because there's an enormous wealth of information out there. So with every new discovery I made, flare-ups, decreased I mean, I was having flare-ups that lasted 2 to 4 months. Now, might be a week or two if I'm not careful. Things like caffeine, sugar, all of the usual suspects. Unfortunately, gluten is a big one. And so it's a matter of just dialing in all of those things, starting with stress, doing what you can, meditating if you can, then diet, supplementation, all of those things, and figuring out what works for you. Like I said, every body is different. And so what works for one person doesn't work for another. But I will just give a shout out to Dr. Keisha Ewers, She wrote a fantastic book on autoimmune, and I actually took a 7-week course class with her on the Shift Network, all about dialing in your autoimmune. And there are 4 pillars to it that she talks about. And another way to get a handle on this is she and other doctors have noticed that people with autoimmune often have adverse childhood experiences or trauma, big T or little t. And so focusing on that as well helps to dial it all down. And is my autoimmune gone? No, because it will never go away. But I will tell you, when I saw my rheumatologist, and he was like, you're way down on all the medicines. And then he put me on the lightest medicine and then hardly any of that. And he's like, what are you doing? And so I basically just shared everything I shared with you and your listeners. And he was really astonished. And I said, well, what do you think about that, doctor? And he was like, well, just keep on doing it. So it can be, there's no cure, but it can be, all the autoimmune diseases can be reversed. And the thing that gave me hope was, and the reason I signed up for Dr. Ewer's class, is that she cured herself, or reversed the progression of rheumatoid arthritis, which is a horrible thing. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners out there probably have it and struggle with it. And it's, incredibly debilitating and painful. And so there is hope. She was a doctor who said, I'm gonna do all the research and find what I can to help herself, and then now to share it with the world. So there are resources out there. And what I would say is, when this first happened to me, I didn't even have a diagnosis, but once you get your diagnosis and know what it is, there are a lot of resources out there, and there's a lot more research than there used to be in this field. Yeah.
Absolutely. I found so many things that you said interesting, because one thing I was going to ask you is if there was any sort of, if you felt like there was any sort of trauma that probably played into some of the symptoms or disorders that you had to deal with. And it's interesting that you did mention that part of the studies, like a lot of people who struggle with autoimmune diseases face some sort of trauma, whether it's a little t or the big T. And something else that you said, which is interesting, I've never heard of lectins. Correct? Is that how you pronounce them?
Yes.
Because and it's crazy that it's coming from plants, right? Because
Right.
nowadays we're told to eat a lot of plant-based food. So that is a very interesting thing. And like you said, everybody's body is different. But I'm happy that you went on the journey of really doing the research, because I think a lot of times in the medical establishment, and obviously I'm not a medical professional, so this isn't medical advice, but I find that when you go to the hospital about something, the first thing is to, put you on medication, which is very important. Um, but a lot of times they're putting a band-aid over something and not really looking at the root cause. Like I've had situations where I've had to do research and really advocate for myself. And and at times, this obviously is a privilege, declining to take certain medication because it just didn't intuitively. I was like, I don't think that that's what I need to be on. That's not the root cause. So doing my own research and going to see other providers allowed me to figure out what the problem was that I was having, why my body was acting a little off, and that was because I was severely vitamin D deficient. So it was bringing up all these other symptoms that people were alluding to, um, disorders that were a lot larger than what I had, and tests were coming back that didn't really match up with the diagnosis. And I was like, well, there's something off. And later found out that I was extremely vitamin D deficient. And that leads to a lot of issues within the body. So long story short, I do like what you said. It's about doing research, advocating for yourself, and then also managing stress, and that's where the Reiki and the sound healing come into play, and also diet and other things. But I'm really happy that you've been able to reverse a lot of the stuff that you were struggling with. Like you said, it's probably still there, but you're not on the highest doses of the medication, and if you even have to take it at all, which I think is a powerful thing to come to, because a lot of people struggle with the things that you've had to struggle with before.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you say that because Jummie, when I first started having these problems with the Raynaud's, they tested me for everything. They tested me for diabetes 3 times. It was always zero, nothing, and many more other tests, the same thing. And so I think you said something that is, I think, hugely important on the healing journey, and that is following our intuition. Like in if you think about it this way, animals, if they don't pay attention to their intuition, they could die, right? Like they're really in touch with it. And I think our ancestors were too, our far back ancestors, they had to trust their instincts about what dangers are out there, and when they sense that, right? But in the modern world, we're attached to our devices and busy. Everybody is super busy. We don't take the time to stop and just say, check in, what's happening here? What feels right to me? And when they gave me those, like, well, it could be this and it could be that, none of that really made sense to me. It just intuitively didn't. And so I call it our inner healer, gut instinct, a message from the heart, trusting your instincts, call it what you will, but our bodies know how to heal. I believe this. And I've seen it in my own journey. If I just get out of my own way and get quiet and listen, I have a sense as to, like, maybe this would work, or I don't think I like the sound of that, and so it really is about getting in touch with that inner wisdom that we all have, that we tend to just be too busy. There's too much noise in our lives to really pay attention to. And it sounds like that worked for you too, right?
Yeah, it absolutely. I think, we tend to give our power away a lot. And again, I always want to preface, like, obviously this is not a call to, like, not go to a doctor or get tested or anything.
Right.
I'm sure you're not saying that either, but
Oh
just,
no.
we always
Yeah.
have to make that disclaimer, because, medical professionals, they are professionals for a reason and they do have a lot of the answers. But there are moments where it's like you said, we really have to tap into that intuition and be like, I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't feel right to me. And especially when, like you said, they kept increasing your medication, and you're not getting better. Again, it's just like a blanket or a band-aid over the larger problem. And it does take us sometimes doing that additional research and listening to our bodies. Like, there's so many different studies on the body to be able to spontaneously heal itself, and a lot of things that you felt like you couldn't overcome, all of a sudden you never really run into those issues. They're more or less reversed. And I think it's such a beautiful thing that the body is able to do, but also, like, hones in on the amount of power that we have, and how a lot of these things sometimes are trauma or stress that we've retained in the body,
Yeah.
and we don't know how to release. And as we learn to release those things, and as we continue to do research and tap into our own power, we're able to really find ways to heal ourselves, which I think that's some of what you're talking about as well.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, I just want to pick up and underscore what you said, because like Western medicine excels at diagnostic skills
Yes.
and doing all of the emergency stuff and so many great things. Doctors have saved my life on a few occasions now. And so, always this is in partnership with your own doctor. But it's like, what I like to say is listen to yourself first and last. One of my teachers said that, listen to yourself first and last. You listen to yourself first and say, check in, what is this feeling like? What does it feel like? How do I want to deal with this? Listen to your doctors. We've got all of these great, reliable sources online, from Mayo Clinic to WebMD to Healthline. They're really reputable places out there where you can go and they talk about complementary medicine. So check in with that, and then check in with yourself again. Listen to yourself first and last. What makes sense to me? And there are these wonderful books. I just want to come back to one thing we were talking about, the trauma part, because for many years I was like, I would read that and I'm like, I didn't have trauma. I didn't have any trauma. Well, there are all kinds of trauma. Dr. Gabor Mate wrote a wonderful book. He's very big in trauma, highly respected. Um, his book is When the Body Says No. And it's basically like it doesn't even have to be big T trauma. It can just be you're in a situation where you don't have a choice in a situation. Maybe it's a job that is um, traumatic, or maybe people end up in relationships that are not healthy. Those kinds of things. If you don't say no to those, or just taking on. In my case, the last disc, the fourth disc ruptured, it was like I was just doing too much. I mean, I was doing everything. I had a full-time job. I sat on these 3 boards in our community. I played classical flute on weekends. We did 100 things. That is a great thing unless you have the spine that I had. And I wasn't listening. I wasn't paying attention. And I heard my back saying, "Ooh, maybe I shouldn't be going on that business trip, that 3-day business trip where I'm going to be in the car a huge amount. That might inflame it." I heard it. I was listening. I wasn't paying attention. My body was saying no really loudly until it was just like, it just collapsed basically. And so there is that, which is not necessarily trauma, but your body is sending a message of no. And that could be you end up getting upper respiratory infections from working 12 or 14 hours a day. For everybody, it's a different thing, but you have to pay attention. Like, where is your body saying no? And Dr. Gabor Mate's thing is if you don't say no to the things that are not in alignment truly with your heart, with your purpose in life, with what brings you joy, if you're not in alignment with that, your body starts saying no. And that's when disease starts happening. And it could be anything. In my case, it's the autoimmune and the spinal issues. For other people, it's cancer or heart disease or diabetes. So many things, so many ways the body can manifest in this. So yeah, that's a really important thing to underscore for folks who might be thinking, yeah, I don't really have, adverse childhood experiences or trauma per se.
Yeah, I love what you said there, and it made me think about a guest that I had on my show. I'm gonna look up her last name really quickly. Yeah, so her name is Rhiannon Hines, and she was on an episode called "The Gateway to God," and we were really taking a deep dive into intuition. And I was asking her, I was like, "Well, how are you able to tell when your intuition is speaking to you, right? Because we have um, different thoughts that come from our mind all the time that are just fear. So how do we know when it's our intuition speaking to us and when other things are speaking to us? So she was talking about how it takes a lot of practice, and a lot of times we're not able to hear when our intuition is speaking to us. So in those moments when we can't hear our intuition speaking to us, our body our bodies react because our bodies are super intuitive, and our bodies will have like a negative reaction to something. So if in your mind you meet somebody that's a little bit off, and you're trying to talk yourself out of it, like, oh, maybe I'm just making it up because I just met this person, I don't know anything about them. But your body, you might feel physically ill or something, and that's your body literally screaming at you. And a lot of times with unaddressed trauma that lasts over time, that's not addressed, it, like we were just discussing, the body screaming at you to address some of that trauma is it bleeds into illnesses, unfortunately,
Yes.
sometimes. So yeah, I think that's a very important call out. So for the listeners who are listening, and they're thinking to themselves like, okay, so what are the pillars for holistic healing in your journey so far and in the work that you do? What would you consider, or what do you consider the pillars to holistic healing? I know we've been talking about it, but if you could sum it
Yeah.
up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so intuition is a really huge one. And people often that I work with often will say, oh, I don't have intuition, or I have it in my work, but I don't have it with just health and healing. Um, Wayne Dyer has this quote that I just love, and I quote often: "If prayer is you talking to God, intuition is God talking to you." And it's like we just have to tap into it. We just have to find the quiet place. So intuition is a huge, big pillar. Then another one that uh, I just think is another cornerstone of this is, for yourself, figure out what is your medicine. And I'll give you some examples. Nature is medicine. Food is medicine. Art is medicine. Music and sound are medicine, right? And the biggest one of all for every single one of us. So people can figure out which one of those. For some people, it's nature. For another, it's music. Figure out. And for other people, it's something totally different that I haven't mentioned. What is your medicine? The thing that makes you feel joyful is where you can find some medicine, right? But the biggest thing of all is your mind is your medicine. And I this is a little controversial. It's going to sound controversial. But we have a choice in every moment of our lives where our minds are, right? So when the disc first ruptured, I'm flat on my back. I'm in the most extraordinary pain of my life, not a day, not an hour. Like, this went on for years. And it's, how do you keep your mind in that hopeful, positive place? I at some point, it was like a light that went off. It was like, okay, I can become this negative, bitter, angry woman, or I can make a different choice, and I can choose love, or I can choose fear. Pema Chodron, the Buddhist nun, says this: every minute of the day, you're choosing love or you're choosing fear, one or the other, right? And so everything that you do comes from that energy. Are you approaching this from love energy, self-love, and love for this journey that you're on? Or are you choosing the negative stuff? I mean, some people sit in that negative, bitter, angry place for their entire lives when something bad happens to them. And I guess I just got to a point where I said, I don't want that to be me. I just don't want that to be me. And I just began doing more and more work to harness my mind as my medicine. And just it's as easy as just saying to yourself, suffering is a choice. Now, I'm not talking about people in Turkey and Syria and Ukraine right now, where that suffering of war and the earthquakes and just the human misery that's happening, that is suffering. That is suffering. But when life deals something to you on your healing journey or otherwise, like, people go through all sorts of things in life, and this is relatable here. You have a choice. You don't have to suffer. You can find, what I like to say is, unnecessary suffering is a choice, right? What we can choose in every moment is asking a different question. Like, at first I was all, and this is another pillar, ask the right questions. I was saying, why me? Why did this happen to me? What am I going to do now? What if something worse happens? What if I never get out of this bed? I mean, I was on all the wrong questions. And again, harnessing that mind is your medicine thing. It's like, I recognize, this is taking me down the downward spiral quickly, right? So how can I turn that around? Well, like, I started, for every negative thing I was thinking, it's as easy as saying, what is the opposite of that? And so I would say to myself, like, all right, not what's the worst thing that can happen? What if something wonderful is going to happen? Maybe, and this is another pillar here, my healing journey is embedded in my life's journey, which is embedded in my soul's journey. Maybe this leads me to my soul's purpose, which it has, with sound healing and more Reiki work and my book. It's like, and getting the word out, it's like that my life purpose came out of this. I was doing really happy things before then. I write grants for nonprofit organizations that make the world a good place. And I felt really good about that. But my healing journey delivered this new aspect of life mission to me, right? And so there are other questions you can ask yourself. And another one I loved doing, and this set me on the path really of robust self-care. It was all about what will my future self. I really thought I was going to be better in 6 months. Then I was like, when 6 months came, I thought a year. So the timeline kept getting pushed out. But the concept is this: what will my future self thank me for one day? And I look back on that now, and it's all these things we've been talking about. It is finding the blessing in this terrible health crisis that happens to us, or any kind of crisis, right? It is the trying to realize that when we say self-care, it's not like, as nice as they are, spa days and all of those things. It really is, what does your body need right now? I mean, there was a time when this first happened, within the first few months, self-care was literally 24 hours a day. It was 24 hours a day. I did nothing else, right? And so it's about honoring, what does your body need at this moment? Maybe you just need a nap. Maybe you need to spend 12 hours just completely unplugging and just taking good care of yourself. Maybe you need to talk on the phone to a friend who understands this downward spiral you're going through. So it's all about like identifying, what can I do today that my future self will thank me for, one day. So those are the basic pillars. I go through a lot more of them in my book. I think one of the most important things we can do, certainly, is taking inventory. I had this life before. I was doing a million things, and some of them really well. And then all of a sudden you can do nothing, right? And so I could not play my instruments. I could not stand at my art easel. I could not pick up my camera, which weighs just a couple of pounds. I could not stand up. And so I in my journal, I just wrote down the big long list of what I could not do. And beside it, it's like, okay, what's a workaround? So I couldn't stand at my easel and throw acrylic paints around, right? And I certainly couldn't watercolor flat on my back in bed, but I could grab a sketch pad and doodle. Like, I could do that. I could write my journal. Um, I As I began to progress, I still could not play classical flute, which you hold out this way and it kind of torques your back, but I could play Native American flute. I could play Native American flute flat on my back. So, whenever anything happens in our lives that's kind of a setback, and it's kind of athletic and danced and all kinds of things when I was able to, and I had a lot of sports injuries. So it's kind of the same thinking, except with a sports injury, at some point you're probably going to be better, right? With this, I wasn't sure. So it was like, all right, let's apply that lens to this, and like, oh, what am I able to do with what I've got? And no matter what you're going through, you can find that. I think everything is incremental, Jummie. It's like we take these little baby steps. And for me, another pillar is setting goals. I couldn't walk more than like from the bed to the bedroom door is about 11 or so steps. I couldn't do that for months. And so the goal became, all right, one day I'm going to walk to the bedroom door. And after that, I'm going to walk to the kitchen. And then after that, I'm going to be able to sit in a chair one day. It was these really baby step goals. But I had to not look at them as, oh, this is so ridiculously baby step, but it's what we have to do sometimes. It's just, you deal with what with what you're dealt. And like I said, you try to find a purpose in it that might get you to your life purpose, right? Or just at least out of this situation you're in.
Yeah. Yeah,
That makes sense.
I love everything that you said there. A lot of what stood out to me really is just about perspective.
It is.
And I love what you said there about um choosing not to suffer unnecessarily, because obviously there's suffering in the world, and there are a lot of things that we can't change by ourselves and we're the victims of, but there's certain things within our control that we can decide how we want to live in the moment,
Yeah.
and how we want to look at the moment, even though it looks extremely, um, even though it feels like a very pessimistic outlook, right? So there are a lot of moments in our lives that we can really shape our perspective and how we look at things. So I totally agree with you there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. You know, it's simple, but it isn't easy. And for your listeners out there who
Yeah.
might be going through something terrible, I mean, I might be getting some eye rolls right now, because when I would read stuff when I was down for the count, I was like, oh, come on. Like,
Yeah.
they don't understand what I'm going through,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But it does work. It does. It's another core principle I talk about in the book is called stick withedness, which is simply stick with it. Like try things and don't just give up. Don't just give up. Hold on to the hope. Stick with it for a while. See what works and try to hold on to that hope.
Yeah.
That's really important, obviously.
Yeah, 100%. One thing that really works well for me in my life so far, and it takes a lot of time to get here. And even when you get here, you don't always stay here. It's an ongoing journey of getting to this mental space. But one thing I'm starting to realize in my life, and I'm starting to apply, whatever goals I have, whether it's, healing or achieving certain things, a lot of times people suffer through the process because you have this vision and you don't know how you're going to get there or what it's going to look like. But I'm a very optimistic person. So while I'm still hoping for the best, even though the journey isn't straightforward, and there are a lot of setbacks, I always think to myself, like, even though I'm not where I want to be, I don't have to suffer in this moment. I can
Yes.
hold the image of the future and what I want to be possible, no matter, what it is. But I don't have to suffer in this moment. I can be one with the present, even though it's uncomfortable, because suffering isn't going to help the future outcome that's better manifest any faster.
Yeah.
So that's
Love
something that
that.
really helps me through difficult moments. So I love everything that you said there.
I love that. And you remind me of something that is another key pillar of this, and that is just, yeah, we can suffer, and there were times in my life where I used to suffer through stuff that I look back on now and say, "Oh, what was that about?" Right? We need to enjoy the journey of life and be grateful. Gratitude is a huge pillar of this. And when I started using that flat on my back, trying to heal, um, there were days when I was like, oh, I just don't see anything to be grateful for today. And I was like, oh, come on, Kathy, get with the program. There's something. And things could always be worse than what they are. Be grateful for what you have. And that kind of unlocks things. It really does. When we come at it, again, it's that mind is your medicine thing. The gratitude unlocks more blessings. It just does. And if we can not be so hard on ourselves, right, and just find the joy in what we're going through. And again, there are times when suffering is really just suffering, but as you start to pull out of that, start being more grateful for getting better. Like, there was a time when I put on the pedometer and I walked 25 steps, and then the next day I walked 30. I was like, I am so grateful for that. Not fake gratitude, not fake positivity, but just like really feeling joy in the accomplishment. And I think sometimes we're just so hard on ourselves.
That's the thing right there. We're way too hard on ourselves a lot of times. This has been a fantastic conversation, Kathy. So much
Oh,
wisdom that you've shared, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your journey with the listeners. This podcast is called The Word to the Wise, as you know, and before I let you go, I always ask all of my guests for final words of wisdom. It could be about everything we've been talking about, or it could be something else completely different that you kind of keep in your back pocket as you go through life.
yeah, I have enjoyed this so much, Jummie. It has been just a wonderful conversation for me too. I've just really enjoyed this to no end. Words to the wise. Okay. Um, yeah, I guess I would say the way to think about this is really connecting back to what I said about your healing journey. We tend to look at it as an event, and it's typically a bad event, right? Like if something bad happens to your health, it's like that is not the joyful part of the life journey. But again, sort of focusing on your healing journey is embedded in your life's journey for a reason, and for your soul's journey. And when we tap in and listen to our intuition, listen to our hearts, and follow our bliss, it helps us to get to the place where we're living in our soul's purpose, if that makes any sense. And what I would say is, we're living in really difficult times right now on the planet on so many levels, right? And so the way I like to think of it is, for every one of us on the planet, there is only one you. Like, right? We all have our own gifts. And I think so often, whether it's families, community, school, whatever, sometimes we don't recognize what our innate gifts are. And sometimes the healing journey helps us, it stops us in our tracks. Like sometimes you're just down for the count. There's nothing else you can do. It's a good time to think about, what are my gifts to the world? I mean, they might be anything from doing creative things to inspiring people as you do, to taking care of your family and community in a beautiful way, fighting for justice. So many things that we all could be doing. What is your gift to the world? That is what is also known as genius, not smarts, but genius, the gift within inside each one of us. And sometimes the healing journey conveys that to us. There's only one of each one of us. Each one of us, I believe, come here to express that gift. And so wherever people are in their healing journey or their life journey, I would just say, when you have a moment to think about it, think about it. What is your gift to the world? And how can you bring that forward? Um, there's a wonderful quote I want to share just in closing here, and
Yeah.
it's by Alain de Botton. He wisely said, I have to read this, we should not feel embarrassed by our difficulties, only by our failure to grow anything beautiful from them. I really love that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a beautiful quote right there. I love what you said, because we all have a gift to share with the world, and that's such a beautiful way of ending this episode. Again, thank you, Kathy, so much. I'm going to be leaving the details to your book and your website in the show notes if people want to learn more about the work that you do and connect with you.
Thank you. It has been a joy, Jummie. Thanks so much.